This week, Pope Francis celebrates Pentecost. Some permanent curial appointments are made, and we look at Rome's papal legacy. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections for the week of May 24th. Now, taking up a lot of the Pope's time was Pentecost. That was front and center this weekend. We'll have details on the prayer vigil with new movements and Pentecost Sunday Mass coming up later in the program. But first, the Vatican is denying reports that Pope Francis performed an exorcism after Mass on Pentecost Sunday. As we've become accustomed to seeing, Pope Francis greets members of the congregation after a Mass or an audience. This past Sunday, he was introduced to a young man in a wheelchair who seemed rather agitated as the Pope stood before him. Pope Francis placed his hands on the man's head and said a silent prayer. Afterwards, the Italian television TV 2000, which is owned by the Italian Bishops' Conference, ran a report saying it was an exorcism. TV 2000 reportedly had a couple of priests who are trained exorcists look at the video, and those priests said Pope Francis's gestures reflected what one would do during an exorcism. Father Federico Lombardi, the Vatican spokesperson, issued a statement saying Pope Francis did not intend to perform an exorcism, but simply pray for the suffering of the person before him. Now, theologians and other exorcists contacted by Italian media have said that a priest, even the Pope, would never perform an exorcism without first ruling out physical or mental illness. The Vatican's Financial Information Authority released its very first annual report this week. The report outlines the activities of the AIF and gives statistics for 2012. Now, in 2012, the organization flagged 6 suspicious transactions, and 2 of those were forwarded to the Vatican's Promoter of Justice, or Chief Prosecutor. At a press conference, the director of the AIF, René Brulhart, said this shows not that there's anything wrong, but that the system put in place by the AIF is working. In 2011, 5 suspicious transactions had been flagged. The AIF has 2 main jobs: to gather information about financial transactions at the Vatican and to prevent money laundering or the financing of criminal activity by monitoring financial transactions that go in and out of the Vatican. On Wednesday, Pope Francis held his weekly general audience. Now, at the end of the audience, he told the people gathered at St. Peter's Square that May 24th is the feast of Our Lady Help of Christians, who is venerated at the sanctuary of Sheshan in Shanghai. He asked all Christians to unite in prayer for our brothers and sisters in China, to ask God to give them the grace to be able to announce the risen Christ with joy, to be faithful to the Church and the successor of Peter, and to live out daily service to their nation and fellow citizens in a way that is true to the faith that they profess. He concluded by praying to Our Lady of Sheshan, and we'll have the text of that prayer on our blog. There are several North Americans living at the Vatican. One of them, Cardinal Burke, has been living there since 2008 and has settled quite nicely into the local church. Just this past week, he took part in the March for Life organized by an Italian national pro-life group. And here's what he had to say about the experience.
It's a very joyful event, even though obviously the realities about which we're speaking are in themselves profoundly sad and tragic. The question of abortion, experimentation on human embryos, other attacks on innocent and defenseless life. Nevertheless, the people who are there marching are full of hope. If they didn't have hope, they wouldn't be there. But they have hope that society will be transformed and that the respect for human life will be restored and enhanced. One of the things that was also very impressive to me was there were many, many young people taking part in the march, and it's clear that the pro-life movement is important to young people. and at least in the United States, and I suspect it's true here too, that many of the young people realize that they were born after the permissive legislation with regard to procured abortion was passed, and so they recognize in a particular way what a threat abortion is. I was born in 1948, and not that there weren't abortions at the time, but they were quite rare, and certainly it was by no means legal. But now today, young people grow up in a world where they know that their life was in a certain way under threat from the moment they were conceived. And I believe that that's one of the reasons why there is such a strong participation by young people, because they know what it means to have your life threatened by something like procured abortion. Individuals need to be convinced that their statement for life counts, and that this will change the situation. In other words, that they don't just give up and think, well, abortion is here to stay and there's nothing we do about it. No, and so that part, I think, is universal. And too often in the past, people have simply had the idea, well, this is the way it is, and who cares what I think? But when people see that their fellow citizens or their fellow man believe so strongly about this, and they really do too, then they will come out and join in. There is a, how should I say, when good people are doing something, they attract other good people to join them, and it spreads in a good and positive way, and that's what one hopes for with such a march. That it elevates the consciousness of the population in general to very critical issues for our society.
The Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants is holding their annual plenary meeting this week. Members of the council are focusing their gathering on the document called Welcoming Christ in the Refugee and Forced Migrants. This year also marks 25 years since Pope John Paul II established the council in 1988 with the Apostolic Constitution Pastor Bonus. And it's time to see what Pope Francis has been doing this week and who he's been meeting with. It was Pentecost, so it was busy, but still he got in a few meetings. On Saturday, Pope Francis met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Now, according to the Holy See, the Pope and the German Chancellor spoke about the economic, socio-political, and religious situation in the world, including the persecution of Christians. They also spoke about Europe as a community. Later that same day, Pope Francis led a prayer vigil with members of new movements. He took part in a question and answer session with youth from those movements. While he had the questions in advance, he spoke off the cuff, using personal anecdotes and stories to answer their questions. You can read about those questions and hear the answers on our blog. Sunday morning, the Holy Father celebrated Mass for Pentecost at St. Peter's Square. During his homily, he focused on 3 words he said were essential to understanding the action of the Holy Spirit: newness, harmony, and mission. Again, you can read the full text of that homily on our blog. Pope Francis also paid a visit to some of his neighbors this week. The Missionaries of Charity have a center in Vatican City where they welcome and feed the homeless and the needy. The center is located behind the Paul VI Audience Hall and the offices of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Pope Francis and a small handful of officials walked over to the center to celebrate 25 years that the center has been present at the Vatican. Pope John Paul II invited Mother Teresa and her sisters to open the center in 1988. Wednesday, of course, was the general audience, and during his catechesis, Pope Francis told the faithful that selfishness brings sadness and bitterness, but getting outside oneself is the ultimate source of joy. He also invited the faithful to pray for the victims of the tornado in Oklahoma, and he closed the audience by asking everyone to join him in praying to Our Lady Help of Christians, who is venerated in Shanghai. He said he asked for prayers so that Christians in China may witness the gospel and live their daily lives in accordance with their faith. On Thursday, Pope Francis met with the president of El Salvador, Carlos Cartagena. Among other things, the two men spoke about Archbishop Oscar Romero and how important his witness has been for the nation. Of course, we recently heard that Archbishop Romero's cause for beatification could be moving forward in the near future.
Coming to a place like Niger, one of the poorest countries in the world, there's always a bit of apprehension as to what you're going to see.
En période de crise alimentaire, les populations vendent tout ce qu'ils ont.
For me, it was the first time I visited a refugee camp. You wonder what the future holds for them.
Nous sommes des chrétiens, mais la CADEV a été créée pour appuyer toutes les personnes.
Haba jin daɗi ma kenan, haba. Kawai rawa ma kaɗai muka ta yi.
On May 29th, a new leaf airs at 8 p.m. Eastern, repeating at midnight. And for one day only, watch A New Leaf on demand at saltandlighttv.org.
We've got some big things to report as we look at the nominations and resignations this week. Where to begin? Well, at the Vatican, of course. We learned on Thursday that Pope Francis has confirmed one cardinal in his position. Now, if you'll remember, just after beginning his Petrine ministry, Pope Francis announced he was confirming everyone in their jobs for the time being, and he would take time to reflect on how to proceed. Thursday, the Vatican announced Pope Francis has confirmed one prelate in his job. Cardinal Agostino Vallini is Vicar General for the Diocese of Rome. Pope Francis issued a letter reappointing him to that role. Moving away from the Vatican, we look at Portugal and the Patriarchate of Lisbon. Now, Portugal is the only country to have a Roman Rite patriarch, and he leads an archdiocese that has existed since the 4th century, although it is believed that it may have existed as early as the 1st century. Now, getting to the details. Bishop José do Nascimento Clemente of Porto becomes Patriarch of Lisbon, replacing Cardinal José Policarpo, who turned 75 2 years ago and submitted his resignation as per canon law. Patriarch Clemente will become a cardinal in the next consistory almost automatically. Now, whenever that consistory happens, we don't know yet, even though his predecessor is still alive. This appointment is interesting because it could set off a chain reaction of appointments across the tiny country. Porto now needs a new bishop, and the likeliest candidates are in smaller neighboring dioceses, which will need to be filled if more moves are announced. We'll be keeping our eye on the Iberian Peninsula to see what happens in the next few weeks and months. And Singapore has a new bishop, William Goh Seng Chai. He was previously coadjutor of Singapore. Ensenada, Mexico also has a new bishop. Father Rafael Valdez Torres has been rector of the Sanctuary of Our Lord of Miracles in San Juan Nuevo and bursar of the Diocesan Mutual Sacerdotal. Vatican Connections is interactive. Send us your questions or comments by Facebook, Twitter, email, or post. Via email, send comments to info@saltandlighttv.org, and by post, send letters to 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, Canada. One of the defining characteristics of the Roman cityscape are the fountains on almost every street corner. Some are more utilitarian, and some are definitely intended to make a statement. This week, Catholic News Service looks at Rome's fountains and their papal patrons. So, sit back, relax, and let yourself be transported to Rome. That's it for this edition of Vatican Connections. Don't forget, you can get daily updates on Twitter @VatiConnections or on our blog, saltandlighttv.org/blog. From everyone here, thanks for watching and see you next time.